Hello, Michelle Kotler here, special education attorney and special educator with a bachelor's and master's degree both in special education. And I've taken more statistics classes than I care to remember. And despite how long and drawn out they made that information, I don't know what it would be like today because we're going back in time a ways here in my Wayback Machine when I took statistics. Really, there were two main concepts that I needed to understand. And these are two main concepts that you need to understand as a parent when you are looking at and trying to figure out what these evaluation reports really mean. So I'm going to teach them to you today. And they are the standard deviation and the mean. So the mean is another word for the average. So the average, for example, average baseball scores, average test scores of a classroom. The average is when you take all the numbers, all the scores, for example, for a certain number of people, and you add them up, and then you divide them by the number of people who took it. And that gives you the average. So if there are 10 people in the classroom and each person scored 100% on a test, then you would add up all those 100s. 100 times 10 in this case is 1,000. You divide it by 10, and the average score in that class was 100%. It usually doesn't come out so round, but I obviously created a round number problem for easy math. Now, the average in educational assessment or in statistics is called the mean. The standard deviation means the distance away from the mean. And each assessment and each subtest of each assessment has its own mean and standard deviation. So, for example, for an IQ test, and for most testing, honestly, most standardized testing, not all, but most, the mean score is 100. And the standard deviation is 15. That means on either side of 100, plus or minus 15, as you can see here in this chart, we've got 68% of the population that falls in this, we call this the bell curve. 68% of the population falls within one standard deviation from the mean. So either 15 points below the mean, which would be 85, through 15 points above the mean, which would be 115. So somewhere between 85 and 115 is considered average intelligence. That's plus or minus one standard deviation from the mean. Now, if we go two standard deviations from the mean, we subtract another 15 points on the downside. So we get down to 70. And then we add another 15 points on the high side to get us up to 130. Now, 96% of the population falls within two standard deviations of the mean. So between 70 and 85, we would consider kind of low average intelligence. And then above 115 to 130, we would consider that high intelligence. And then you see that when we go 3 and even 4 standard deviations away from the mean, we have extreme outliers. And these would be young people or adults who have significantly delayed cognitive skills. That's what we would consider in this area right here, below 70. And then our gifted people, we would consider to be above 130, usually 135 in IQ or higher is considered gifted. Okay. Now, where things get tricky is when we start to look at certain eligibility categories, such as developmental delay or cognitive impairment. We're looking at students who have an IQ, and this can vary a little bit from state to state, but technically it really should be 70 or below. And there's another type of testing called adaptive behavior testing, which means skills of daily living, adaptive behaviors. So functional living skills. Can they brush their teeth? Can they get dressed? Can they fix a simple meal? Can they figure out directions? Can they work with money? Can they do certain skills in the community or at home or at school that we would consider appropriate for their chronological age? And there is standardized testing to measure that as well, based on checklists that parents and teachers answer. A common one is the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scale, for example. There's also the ABAS. So there are certain checklists that you would answer. Someone, usually a social worker, would ask you a series of questions and you would answer them as honestly as you can. Now, it's very important not to answer them in a way that either overrepresents what your child can actually do by him or herself, or underrepresent what your child can actually do by him or herself. It's very important to be accurate and to try to be as objective as possible. I know you love your child, and different people, different parents have certain things going on themselves. And sometimes there are parents who want their child to seem more impaired than they actually are for whatever financial or emotional reasons they have that they may not even fully appreciate. Or there are parents who may want their child to appear better off in terms of functioning than the child actually is, again, for whatever emotional reasons the parent has. And I'm not here to invalidate or validate any of those reasons. I'm just cautioning you that when you are responding to these kinds of questions and checklists, it's very important to be as objective and neutral and accurate as you possibly can, and to try to leave your emotions at the door. This is not about how you feel about it. This is to get an accurate representation, a valid assessment of what your child's functioning truly is. And that's very important because all of the programming that your child will experience is going to stem from that initial eligibility determination. It isn't necessarily supposed to, legally speaking, but unfortunately, when the rubber meets the road, that is very often what will happen. So if you do not want your child to be placed into a classroom of children with severe cognitive delays, then we need to make sure that you're accurately representing your child's skill level. And by the same token, if your child's skill level is significantly delayed and he or she cannot function well in a general education environment, and you believe your child needs to be in a more modified and supportive classroom environment with a different curriculum and more attention and specialized help, then you need to be really accurate about what your child can and cannot do. And the child's teacher will do the same. So it's very important because we need to get a few different people's opinions, their different viewpoints and observations about what the child can and cannot do in different settings. And we put all that information together to arrive at what is hopefully an accurate and correct eligibility decision. So I want to make sure that you understand this so that when you see this kind of information in your child's test reports, you know what they're talking about. I want you to understand some other terms that you will see in terms of the evaluation scores your child obtains when they do standardized testing. There are three other important things to understand. One of them is the percentile. You will often see a percentile score reported. Please note, there is no such thing as the 100th percentile. That does not exist. The highest percentile a child can achieve is the 99th percentile. And that means that they performed better than 99% of all the peers their age who took the same test. So you cannot do better than the 99th percentile. That is the best there is. On the other extreme end of the spectrum, you may see a percentile represented as less than 0.1%. That means, unfortunately, that every other person that age who took that test performed better on it than your child did. So if you see that at the other extreme, less than 0.1%, that is, unfortunately, that is the lowest percentile that can possibly be reported. Anything that is less than the 50th percentile is an area of concern. And of course, the lower the percentile gets, the more extreme the concern should be. Now, there are two other kinds of scores that often will be reported, and one of them I do not favor, and one of them I do favor, and I'll explain why. So you will often see in standardized test reports an age equivalent score or a grade equivalent score or both reported. Grade equivalent scores are really not useful. They're not useful information, and here's why. It's not unusual for a child to repeat a grade, particularly a child who's struggling, such as one who's been referred for special education evaluation and referral. So if your child has repeated a grade, or possibly even two grades, which is not unheard of, then a grade equivalent score is really not useful. So for example, the score report might say for a grade equivalent score 3-4. And what that means is your child scored in the fourth month of the third grade. So let's say your child is in the fifth grade right now, the fourth month of the fifth grade. So that would look like a 2-year delay, which is significant. But let's say your child's actually repeated a grade. Let's say they repeated kindergarten because they were not doing well in the early grades. So now that 2-year delay is actually a 3-year delay. And it would not be hard at all for that information to get lost in translation so that it is not accurately captured in the test reports or in the school team's considerations for educational programming. So in reality, your child has a 3-year delay, which is more alarming. But on paper, it looks like your child has a 2-year delay if you're only going by grade equivalent scores. So grade equivalents are really not favored. Age equivalent scores are favored because your child's age is your child's age. So let's say your child's age equivalent score on a subtest is 7.4. That means your child performed on that measure as well as a child who is 7 years, 4 months old. Now, if your child's chronological age is 7 years, 10 months old, that's great. We're not worried about your child with regard to that skill. If your child's chronological grade is 9 years, 7 months old, we may be a bit concerned about a 2-year delay, more than a 2-year delay. If your child's age is 15 years and 4 months old, then we are extremely concerned because now we're looking at an 8-year gap in skills based on your child's chronological age. So the age equivalent score is very valuable. It's very useful. It's easy to understand. And you can compare that to your child's chronological age very quickly and just do a subtraction problem. And now you understand the severity of the gap between your child's chronological age and their skill level educationally in that particular area. Okay, so I hope this has been useful information for you. If the scores are not reported this way, if you don't see any standardized testing information, you want to inquire about that because any type of psychoeducational or speech and language testing or occupational therapy testing or physical therapy testing, there should be standardized testing that is administered. Now, particularly in the areas of occupational therapy and physical therapy, I have seen, and it's very common actually to see public school systems that try to get away with observational types of evaluations only, where they watch your child perform a variety of skills on a checklist and they check whether your child can do it or not do it. That is not sufficient. That is not a full and individual evaluation in all areas of suspected disability. They need to go back and they need to do standardized assessments with scores, standardized scores, such as mean and standard deviation, age equivalencies, percentiles, and all of those skills. Those tools are out there, they exist. The counties have them. If they don't have them, they need to get them, or they need to pay for an independent educational evaluation so you can take your child to a proper occupational therapist who can administer standardized testing and give you a proper score report. So don't settle for this checklist garbage that these schools are trying to get away with. That is not a full and individual evaluation in those areas. It is not suitable. They do it that way because it's faster and they are slammed and there aren't enough people to do the job. Unfortunately, the need far outweighs the demand far outweighs the supply. So that's the scenario that we're in right now. And what I suggest that you do, of course, is learn how to advocate for your child like a professional so that the squeaky wheel gets the grease and your child gets the correct and complete evaluations that he or she is entitled to under the law. Thanks for watching. See you next time.